After the grand success of the inaugural edition, where the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, had first shared his grand economic and development vision for the country, Airtel and the Economic Times came together once again to host the second edition of the Global Business Summit. This two-day event in the national capital brought together over 1,500 business and political leaders, policymakers and thinkers from more than 10 countries.
Sri Vinit ji, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, some of you may recall what I have said before, that true reforms are those which result in transformation in the lives of citizens. As I have said before, my goal is reform to transform. In simple terms, it means Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. Since this government took office, growth has increased and inflation has decreased. Foreign investment is increased and the fiscal deficit has decreased. And despite a slowdown in global trade, the balance of payments deficit has also decreased. Yet, such broad statistics give only a partial picture of what we are attempting and what we are achieving. It is often said, the devil is in the detail. But I believe that God is in the proper execution of many so-called details. It is these so-called details which, when done well, add up to the big picture. You may be interested to know that. And I will mention very few things. India's highest ever urea fertilizer production was achieved in 2015. India's highest ever production of ethanol as blended fuel benefiting sugarcane farmers was in 2015. The highest number of new cooking gas connections to the rural poor was achieved in 2015. India's highest ever output of coal was achieved in 2015. India's highest ever generation of electricity was achieved in 2015. India's highest ever quantity of cargo handled by major ports was in 2015. India's fastest average turnaround time in ports was in 2015. India's highest ever increase in railway capital expenditure was achieved in 2015. India's highest ever number of new highway kilometers awarded was in 2015. India's highest ever production of motor vehicles was achieved in 2015. India's highest ever software export were achieved in 2015. India's highest ever rank in World Bank doing business indicators was achieved in 2015. India's highest ever exchange reserves were achieved in 2015. It is important to remember that in the preceding years, many of these indicators were moving in the opposite direction. Not only have many indicators improved, but they have improved by large margins. In 19 months, much has been achieved. Much more is expected of us, and these are challenges ahead. Yet, I'm now confident that we can successfully go forward, that we can successfully go faster, and that we can do so in a way that will benefit the common people. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
The entire world is talking about India. India is now the only silver lining in a dark global economy. Even China is slowing down. The goal of our panel discussion this evening is to take an objective look at India's growth potential in the backdrop of these global challenges. We have a wonderful mix of global and Indian CEOs who bring both an external and an internal perspective. So let me start off with a quick external perspective. Mr. Nally, PwC has just completed a global survey of 1,400 CEOs. What are global CEOs talking about India? And from the outside, what big changes have you noticed here?
I would say from just a global economic standpoint, the mood was pretty gloomy, to say the least. The survey that you just mentioned, our 19th annual Global CEO Survey, confidence levels down in a very significant way year to year. In fact, the number of CEOs, global CEOs, that are actually predicting that the global economy will actually decrease this year is about 27%. So not stay flat, not increase, decrease, 27% of the CEOs. The bright spot, though, and this is a bright spot, the CEOs that participated in our survey from India, their confidence levels about revenue growth is up about 27 points above the average of the global CEOs. So the CEOs right here in this room from India, have a very positive view about the potential of their companies, their ability to really capture some of the tremendous opportunities that sit right here in this economy. The one point I would leave you with, though, just sort of reflect on, is even though there's a high degree of confidence with the ability of Indian CEOs to prosper in this environment, and you would think that with an economy that's growing 7.7%, this would be triggering a lot more interest in terms of the opportunities that are right here in India. And I think one of the challenges that collectively I know the government is really focused on is how do you make it easier to do business in India? And I think that would be a tremendous sign to the international community as the changes that are taking place here in India. I think that could be a real step in the right direction.
Let's get some perspective from within, starting with Mr. Birla. In your view, what are the biggest factors that are going to help India to sustain 7% growth? And what are the biggest hurdles we must tackle right away?
We have a huge demographic dividend. We're talking about an average age of 27-something, and we will soon have the largest number of young people in the workforce as compared to any other economy anywhere in the world. And I think that is something that we need to cash in on, and that is an advantage that is, like I said, a very structural advantage that, something that no one can take away from us. The fact that we've become the fastest growing economy in the world at 7.5%, I think is something to really crow about. On the flip side, I think we have some issues to deal with. So clearly, there is a slowing down of investment in the economy, especially by the private sector. And I think to kickstart that investment by the government in infrastructure is something that becomes critical. I think that is the one factor that will set off a virtuous circle of investment and growth in the economy that all of us are looking for. I think you have issues about ease of doing business, where you really need more collaboration between the states and the center. The states where the real action happens. And you cannot have, in a federal structure like ours, a situation where the state is not in sync with the center. And I think the way to do that is to create as much of a competitive environment where each state is vying with the other for the next dollar or rupee of investment. So you have issues like that, like every economy would. But I would say that in net, the advantages that we have at this point in time far outweigh the problems.
Sure. On the same note, Mr. Mittal, over the past month or so, what has been playing more on your mind? India's much wanted growth potential, or the many local and global challenges that obviously exist?
Well, I think India clearly now plays on the global stage. So it is not completely insulated from what's happening around the globe. But as Kumar just mentioned, India has a unique advantage in terms of its demographic, in terms of its robust growth. When the entire developed markets are growing at 2.7%, with Europe down to 1.7%, anything higher than 7% is nothing but a dream. So I would say we should really use India's advantage in a generally globally weak markets. And if you really look at even in the globe, some of the sectors are still doing extremely well. And they are playing, I would say, to advantage of India. And what is remarkable about this new government is that they are creating capacity on one side and demand on the other side almost at the same time. You need to have people sign up for bank accounts to be financially included. On the other hand, 11 payment bank licenses have been granted. A lot of work is going on in that area. India is, as we all know, and some of our foreign friends experience, does not have the same quality of infrastructure that the developed world has, or even China has developed in the last 20 years. But it is mitigating that by going the digital route, by creating a massive digital wave in the country to ensure that we can, in some sense, mitigate the absence of hard infrastructure in the country. Similarly, in the area of healthcare, in the area of manufacturing, on one side you're generating the Make in India wave, on the other side you're ensuring that demand generation keeps on picking up. A lot of bottleneck around the projects that were in play are being cleared very fast. So all in all, I think the play is wonderfully suited to help India grow at 7+% growth. What is very heartening is that the global leaders are now talking very highly about India's potential, India's growth, and gone are the days when we would sit on the opposite side trying to convince them to come to India, have a higher amounts of investments, have more confidence in us. I think it's quite the other way around, whether in Davos or here today.
That's true.
Each one of them, when we hear from them, they talk very highly about India. So in my view, it's a perfect storm for India, in India's favor. I think we should take great advantage of it. And I have no doubt, under the present government and the entrepreneurial spirit of India, we should do well. Just one last closing point I will make is, the government needs to continuously work on ease of doing business in India, keep on making things simple. I think entrepreneurial energy will be fully released if we can make application of all regulations and rules as simple as possible.
Mr. Kotak, a question for you. Some believe that the greatest threat to India's growth comes from outside, not within. A possible hike in the interest rates in the US, a bigger slowdown in China, and some even feel that a prolonged spell of very low oil prices could be counterproductive as well. According to you, how well can India weather such external shocks?
I just look back, say, 10 years ago, and if I was asked a question, what would your dream be for macro for India? And I would say 4 points. Low oil and commodities, low inflation, very low current account deficit, and huge global capacity available for India to build its infrastructure. Today, the dream is true. All the 4 factors globally are available. Low oil, huge capacity out there in the world, low current account, low inflation. This is our time to really think about this as a perfect batting wicket, and for us to go out there and play our strokes. And at times, I really feel that the certain level of despondency is more from Indians within than a lot of global players from outside, who outside in feel that India is actually such a wonderful place. Therefore, in order to get better, we Indians need to think about this, get a bit of our animal spirit without going on a debt excess binge, but going out and really building India. This is the best opportunity to make India.
How would you see it, Mr. Agarwal, the commodity down cycle? Do you see that as a threat at all to what's happening within the country?
No, in a way, I can see this opportunity. For us, India produced 10% of what China produced. With a similar population, this is the time, what you said is correct, but it's a time to build the capacity. In natural resource, we have been branded as a importer. It must go away. We must produce 50% of our energy. If you look at even the electronic, we are importing $100 billion of electronic. And you watch, in 3 to 5 years' time, it will be $500 billion. And we need thousands of entrepreneurs to come up and start manufacturing this. So this is the innovation technology. I'm part of it. When I see the tremendous opportunity, definitely in the short term, we have this in our industry where the prices has gone down. But the great advantage for the country, this money which they are saving, $100 billion, $70 billion in oil, should be channelized into infrastructure.
That's true.
So these are the opportunities I look at.
Thank you. On the topic of infrastructure, Mr. Hochberg, you've been coming to India quite frequently the last few years, and you've been tracking infrastructure here very closely. Is India moving fast enough on infrastructure?
Well, when I look at what's happened here in the last several years, for example, at Exim Bank in the United States, we have made more loans and guarantees in India in the last 7 years than all of President Bush and all of President Clinton combined. So the pace has only been accelerating, and we still have a year to go. So I think there is a great move in infrastructure. It begins with power. And I would say I think India is second to no country in the world in terms of its embrace of renewable energy, the national solar mission, the amount of solar power, the move towards nuclear, and the move in transportation. So you look at those are the basic ingredients of infrastructure. Plus you've got a very digital and tech-savvy population, probably one of the most tech-savvy in the world. So you put all those pieces together, you've got a lot of the ingredients, but to keep up with that pace of infrastructure requires a lot of capital and making it a lot simpler. I mean, the front page of your own paper today says, with Make It in India ticket, quality FDR rides a bullet train. So, I mean, it's right on the front page of the paper. That's what needs to happen, and it needs to accelerate.
Mr. Rice, there is a strong view that a prolonged spell of very low oil prices could actually harm the world economy. What do you see? Is that a threat for India?
I think that we need to be preparing for a period of low oil prices. I've been in the Middle East in the last few days, and I don't see any changes that would suggest that oil prices are going to go up in the near term. So countries and companies have to figure out how they need to adjust and turn this into an advantage, if that's possible, or mitigate the disadvantages that go with low oil.
Mr. Mittal, what is your assessment of the pace of reforms, especially in the light of sharp political differences that do exist?
Well, I think we are all conscious and aware of the logjam that we see in the Parliament. In the last few sessions, we have seen a constant meltdown in the upper house. But I think the government has very smartly used the executive way to move things around and move forward. Today, we talk about GST a lot. I think that's one thing that keeps on coming back onto the table. But honestly, the world has not stopped. I mean, trade, industry, everything is moving forward. We are still getting our growth rates. It is a different matter that if we can get the GST through, which I think all of us sitting in this room are hopeful will happen possibly in this upcoming budget session, we could accelerate the pace of our growth by 1.5%, and that we all know makes a tremendous difference in lifting people out of the poverty. So I truly hope that the efforts of everybody in this room and the political leadership is going to bear some fruit in the coming session. I would say other than that, land has been delegated into the states. States are now responsible for giving land, and I think a lot of work is going on. There are not too many other reforms that are truly left, and we do talk about second-generation reforms, but if you really minutely look at it, there's not much left. Defense FDI is allowed, insurance FDI has gone through. I read in your paper the other day that there may be a thinking about opening up or liberalizing the FDI and retail as well. So most of the pieces of foreign investment into the country and for people in India, I think reforms are in place, and I hope GST goes through. It is really the ease of doing business, which is directly and squarely in the hands of the executive, that needs attention, and I'm very pleased to say our Prime Minister is committed to bring India's ranking in the ease of doing business to a good, strong, healthy 2 digits from where we are on a medium to high level 3-digit number at the moment.
Mr. Barton, I'm told that you meet pretty much 2 CEOs every single day. From what you've been hearing from the global CEOs that you meet, are they happy with the pace of reforms, especially in the light of the political challenges we've been facing?
There's a much higher appetite, I think, and excitement about what's happening. In some ways, it may be more than the reality of what can actually happen, but I would say there's been a significant shift. It was not on the table, and I've said it publicly myself 5 years ago. I would say don't spend your time. It's too difficult. It's challenging. I think it's changed significantly. I think one of the biggest indicators, though, are actually some of the pension funds. And I noticed the Premier of Ontario is here in a delegation from Canada. Being a Canadian, I have to point that out. That one of the groups she represents is a very significant set of long-term investors, I think some of the best in the world, who've invested and are making significant investments into India. And I think that's the surest sign of, I think, change and where things are moving and what we should look at.
Mr. Whitty, I think you brought the entire GSK board here to India a few years ago for them to see the opportunity that exists here. As a global investor, what more would you like to see happen on the ground?
I actually think India has many of the same challenges as a company. Sometimes it feels very hard to set the strategy. It feels pretty hard to set the policy. It's really hard to get the implementation. The bigger your company and the more complex the system, the harder it gets. So actually, I think there's a really strong argument to focus on consolidation and implementation of many of the things which have already been begun, remembering that, like any company, people inside of India are used to working in an old way, and you want those same people to learn to work in the new way. And I think that in India there's a great opportunity to think about what are the challenges of making sure that millions implement the regulation and follow it in a straightforward way. And that would be one area I would encourage a focus.
I'm afraid on that note, we'll have to bring this discussion to a close. Thank you. You've been a wonderful panel.
Currently we have 1 bed for every 1,050 people. So we need to add 600,000 beds, which will cost us $50 billion. I truly believe that because of the huge demand-supply gap, that people, smart investors, have realized that long-term patient capital is required for this industry. Going by what the listed healthcare companies and their performance, if you have a good company with talent and built on strong fundamentals, that we really can bridge this gap. Health is a state subject, whereas a lot of directions do need to come from the center. And for the private sector to flourish, we have to have 74 licenses to open a hospital. I think we need to simplify. The ease of doing business is very important. Also, the expectation from the healthcare industry, the potential is enormous. I mean, if you look at medical tourism, the value is $97 billion, but India doesn't get 1%. But we have a great value proposition in terms of world-class clinical outcomes at 1/10 of the cost. So we have the potential to attract lots of investment as well as earn revenue, which can be counted as export. And I believe that India's time has come.